trouble I have with ChatGPT is basically a bandwidth communication issue that when I'm writing software, primarily what I use it for, I've got like say 100 files, but it's I can only sort of copy and paste one file in at a time. But if you have this sort of conversation going, it sort of has a cache of what was previously entered. But I add some things to my files like metadata that you wouldn't normally add to files, like this file is stored in this location, top of the line. And then when I'm copying and pasting code back and forth, that sort of stays in there just to keep it more on the tracks. And I think also WebStorm have come out with a tool that sits within your IDE now. I just got an email about 3 days ago. I haven't tried it yet. But that might be looking at your whole code base at once. A bit like Copilot, I guess. But for me, Copilot's even just a bit of a toy. It doesn't really do much apart from just the current line. So once we have a ChatGPT level 4 and above that can read my whole code base at once, and it can generate pull requests. So I'll just say I want this program to do this. Um, that will be crazy powerful. So basically, I could say I want this database to add this field, and I want the TypeScript queries to be generated. But one problem I find that is that ChatGPT is weaker with new frameworks that other people have written. So you've got like a new NPM module, and it's only come out a few days ago. The code that it generates is just crap. So I'm finding like the vanilla JavaScript programs that I'm writing, ChatGPT is just great at writing stuff like that. And I think that's something that framework authors need to be aware of, is that if your framework isn't ChatGPT friendly, you're going to lose mind share for it, because I'm not going to use your framework if I can just do the same thing in vanilla JavaScript 10 times quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you couldn't have said it better yourself, because a lot of people think that GPT is like, oh, it's able to code websites and regular Java, but it understands SQL, Python, Java, and native English, right? The whole purpose of being able to type in native English, and then translate that into code based off prompt engineering, tied to the fact that it has plugins now, different plugins that are able to get even more closer to the data and get more enhanced. This is really where the game changes. I mean, you're talking about science fiction. Like 5-10 years ago, if we're having this conversation, even 5 years ago during lockdown, people would think you're crazy, right? People would think
Yeah.
you're out of your mind. They think you literally just have been in so much copium that you're hallucinating. So even AI engineers right now, they said that we're really progressing and transcending at an accelerated rate, exponentially faster than anticipated. Like if you think about the timeline of GPT and when it came out, it was in November. We haven't even hit a year since the actual release of GPT hitting the market, right? It was November of like just last year. And we're months away from the next November, and we're already looking at all the things that OpenAI is doing, all the thing that Microsoft is doing, all the thing that Google's doing. Like we've seen what Google's doing with recently, they just partnered with Mayo Clinic, right? My Mayo Clinic, and they ultimately are partnering with them in that effort to be able to research and dive deeper, being able to find new medicines, new treatments, and utilize this. Google's testing their AI model to basically see if they can utilize something in that capacity. And then Mayo Clinic basically formed this like massive partnership with Google. And if you don't know, Mayo Clinic is the #1 hospital in the United States, like, all of the United States. So we're looking at industries that used to be very buttoned up, super buttoned up, very traditional, looking at massive disruption right now. And it's a race of who is going to be the generative AI supreme, right? Back in the days, like you have Google now, you have Microsoft, you have Amazon, you have OpenAI. Like you have a lot of people that are contending to basically get their models out there. And that's not even factoring in China. That's not even factoring in, other regions, right? We're just looking at the mold here in terms of what is accessible. So I have a frame of reference that I always tell people. I say, looking at the AI landscape right now, one human day is currently equivalent to at least 2 to 3 weeks of AI progression in terms of just data progression, the amount of data it can process, as well as just GPU processing in general, in addition to being able to take a lot of the contextual information and then dilate that into a use case that's able to co-pilot. You're going to see this term a lot. It's called co-piloting in the job market. And what that means is a lot of people, even doctors, they're using LLMs and GPT to be able to create almost like virtual assistants of where they're able to take off a lot of the nuance of workloads that they don't want to deal with, have GPT field that, and then have them focus on what matters, basically what they're working on. And you're going to see this more and more for every single facet inside of the job market, for every single
That's
function.
exactly
Whether
what I feel like I'm like, you know. That's
yeah,
exactly what I feel like. Like I'm able to produce stuff so much quicker. Like I'm working on a vanilla JavaScript framework, and I wanted to change the router so that it didn't work from just push state router. I wanted it supported hash routing because I wanted to stick it up on GitHub pages, and I didn't want to have some server doing all the redirection. So I literally typed into I copied and pasted the router code, and then this is going to disappoint some of my YouTube fans that think I code all this stuff by hand. Literally, it coded the hash routing perfectly within like 3 seconds.
yeah.
You know, and I'm using that code like I'm just learning it, but it's just
It's very interesting and it's scary at the same time because progression has accelerated tenfold. Progression of everything, every single thing has accelerated tenfold. But at the same time, expansion of the job market in terms of skills, in terms of job skills, has not caught up. Meaning, I was looking at Fortune the other day, and there was an article that came out saying Gen Z is currently learning soft skills because they were in lockdown and they lack soft skills. So you have like Deloitte, Accenture, and all of these different, big consultant firms are trying to train them to get acclimated into the actual job market because they don't know how to conduct themselves inside this arena. Like it's apparently a very big problem right now where there's a lack in soft skills, right? Soft skills being how to conduct yourself, how to act, what you should wear and what your etiquette should be inside of a work environment, all this stuff. It's insane because we're talking about AI. You and I are talking about AI right now and progression and transcendence in terms of productivity. And meanwhile, the actual job market of people who are about to hit the workforce has not caught up. They haven't caught up in essence of what's happening in the market, and they also haven't caught up in essence of what the reality of the real world is. Because remember, you got to remember that all these people were in lockdown, and even before lockdown, they were maybe in high school or they were in college or they were sheltered in a very sheltered academic environment, right? And they haven't had exposure to the real world. So this kind of creates this balancing act of where you have a bunch of new people that are entering the job market, and these are your candidates that you're looking to fill in these specific positions. But these people don't have the adequate mindset and things that they need to do to be able to fulfill that what we're doing, right? So it turns into this whole like cat and mouse game, which is very interesting because from a generation perspective, I'm from the millennial generation, right? My generation was the one who created, Facebook, YouTube, like we created all of that stuff. And I can understand that every single generation has its ups and downs and every single generation has its like growing pains. But statistically, in the data, there has been no generation like Gen Z that has basically had such a harder time in keeping up due to the nature that of what they were exposed to. I mean, they grew up during the 2008 financial crisis, right? That's when they grew up. And a lot of their parents, they if you remember the 2008 financial crisis, it was hard times growing up. Some of them went through and growing up and seeing that, and then they grew up in a time of massive disruption from the lockdown to COVID to all this stuff that we didn't have to deal with. So in retrospect, I can understand that they're growing up in a very different dynamic, but also there's a massive privilege influx of where a lot of people that are Gen Z feel entitled to what they need to get because when they were younger, they were told, if you do this, you get this. If you do that, this is what you get. So if that is repetition, like back to machine learning, what we talked about, repetition, 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 then you start to go in with an ideal saying, I did this. I did all of this. I deserve this now. So this is where that disconnect comes from. And I feel like it's very interesting and it's directly correlated to, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and everything else, because they haven't even gotten to the aspect of thinking in the way that we're talking right now. there are some outliers. There are some outliers of like Gen Z geniuses, right? That are ultimately like Tesla, for example. He just hired a, what was it, 14-year-old guy or something like that, who is part of SpaceX now. Not Tesla, SpaceX. And these are outliers, right? But we're talking about a huge disconnect in terms of the level of disruption that they've had to face, the ever expanding mental health crisis in comparison to all of the above that's happening around them on a constant. So it's a pro and a con because they're dealing with having to face the real world and realizing that this is the reality, right? The reality is not as pretty as they were told growing up. And then you have an influx of mental health issues and crises. And then you have a massive distrust of public service, like you're seeing right now in the United States. And then you have like this compounding effect of where people, they start to create their own narratives, their own ideals, and then they create their own little groups and cults. And then you have all this disruption that's happening, like AI, ML, robotics, right? All this stuff that's happening around them. It's just like back in the dot-com era. It's just like in the era when people were like frantic about Y2K and they started to create all these different factions. I'm seeing history repeat itself almost to the T. And granted, I was born back in the 90s, but even I remember that once we had the age of information in terms of computers, it disrupted the fax machines, it disrupted the middlemen, right, of a lot of these different jobs. And also, once we had the computers, it replaced a lot of that. But then came the age of information, where it was all the dot-com era, and that replaced things again. So I see a very big similarity in all of this. Like history is repeating itself once more.